Land invasions, property rights and housing queues, all at the heart of a heated national debate. The Democratic Alliance is moving to amend the Prevention of Illegal Eviction and Unlawful Occupation of Land Act. The party is arguing it's time to protect law-abiding property owners from illegal land grabs. How will this proposed amendment strike the right balance between constitutional rights and community needs? We talk now to the DA about the PI Act Amendment Bill and what it means for South Africa's land future. DA Human Settlement spokesperson Luyolo Mphithi joins me now. Good morning, Luyolo, and thank you very much for your time. Let's just start with what motivated the DA to introduce this amendment now.
Thank you, Iman. Good morning, and good morning to your listeners. I think we really need to be able to prefix the background of how these amendments have come about. I think it's been clear for the past couple of years, we have seen massive land invasions across the country. And these land invasions are not just the occupying of land unlawfully, but they have a much deeper impact on basic service delivery, particularly when it comes to municipalities. We know that municipalities are failing to enforce bylaws, and this is mostly related to the fact that there's limited financial resources, and municipalities are simply unable to secure land that it owns. And so what we then have is that we have an overburdened municipality across the country that is unable to protect the land, and that's why unlawful occupations are taking place. And so these amendments are coming from that background because we see the crisis that our country is in. The Department of Human Settlements has simply failed to deliver housing. But unfortunately, there's been criminal syndicates that have manipulated the struggles and the deep struggle for South Africans who want housing in our country and incited most of these land invasions to take place. And so these amendments come in light and in the background of that particular matter to say we really need to clamp down on this criminality and be able to protect land.
I want you to just tease out for us the definition of land invasions that you're seeking to tackle in this proposed amendment.
Right. So the amendments, there's three broad amendments that we are making. Firstly, we are saying we've seen across the country there are political parties that are calling for South Africans to occupy land unlawfully. This land could be land that is privately owned. It could be land that is owned by the state. And so we are saying in our amendments that we want those who incite and organize people to unlawfully occupy land to really face criminal charges for that incitement, because it is indeed criminality. But not only that, we also ask in these amendments that there should be an extension in which the court looks at various criteria before granting an order, an eviction order. And in essence, we are saying that it is fundamentally important to add more options and conditions to the court when considering an eviction order. And lastly, we also say that we would like the courts to specify a time period in which it gives to municipalities or provincial governments to provide alternative accommodation, because what seems to be happening is that municipalities are simply not providing the alternative accommodation, which is what the PI Act is requiring municipalities to do. So in doing this, we are saying that there must be a time period that must be given for the municipality or for the province to find alternative accommodation so that individuals are able to be moved from the land that's either privately owned or state-owned to an alternative accommodation that is being provided by government.
Let's lean into the extension of the court criteria for a moment, Luyolo. So this is what you're asking so courts have to consider what you're proposing before granting alternative accommodation. I think the risk there and the question that's raising some concern is around the protections for vulnerable groups like the elderly, disabled, or women-headed households that PI was initially designed to protect. What's the consideration that you're bringing in with regard to these groups as you bring in and call for this amendment?
Well, Iman, I think it's important to be clear that the intention of the PI Act is indeed to protect the most vulnerable South Africans in our country. And we know that in Section 26 of the Constitution, the right to housing must be progressively realized. And that is what the Constitution puts forward to government to progressively realize the right of housing. However, we do also note that the land invasions that have taken place in the past couple of years have been incited by organizations like the EFF, who have called on these very vulnerable South Africans to then unlawfully occupy land. And we need to be able to look at this in a measured approach. The DA is very clear that the Department of Human Settlements has failed to deliver housing to South Africans. But equally, criminality cannot be allowed to stand, specifically when it's being organized by criminal syndicates like the EFF. Construction mafias are also involved in the organization of leading people to unlawfully occupy land. But the core of it is that the amendments the DA are making will not take away from the protection that vulnerable South Africans have in the particular act. So that is not being taken away. What we're simply saying is that there needs to be more ways in which we look at how we deal with criminality, particularly when it comes to incitement. But further, when we look at the criteria to courts to say, historically, what is the financial background of the individual, where has the individual stayed, so that there are more options to consider when a court considers an eviction order. And this simply does not take away from the protection of South Africans. In fact, this is to protect those very South Africans who, by these unlawful evictions, they are queued, they are skipped in the queue of the housing needs register, because government now has to find alternative accommodation instead of focusing on the core business, which is to provide housing to South Africans. And so queue jumping happens. So this legislation will actually do the protection of vulnerable South Africans and making sure that, one, the amendments don't take away from those who are homeless, but number two, make sure that those who are initiating criminality as it relates to taking of private property or land that belongs to the state are fully able to face the might of the law in this particular instance.
There's so much that you said in that sentence that I really want to get to, and I will in a moment. But you've labelled one of your partners, one of your colleagues really in Parliament, a whole party who's been democratically elected, a criminal syndicate. I just want to make sure that I heard correctly.
There are political parties, including the EFF, that have made calls for South Africans to unlawfully occupy land. That is wrong. It's criminal. It should not be allowed, Iman. And I stand by those words because there are individuals, political parties, criminal syndicates that also include construction mafias that are inciting South Africans and playing on vulnerable South Africans and their lack of housing because of the failure of the Department of Human Settlements to illegally invade land. And that should be called out. That is a criminal incitement, and it is wrong. And I think the EFF has been very central in making those calls for people to unlawfully occupy. And this bill is trying to ensure that those who make such calls for people to take the law into their own hands and act criminally face the might of the law. And that is why the amendment is seeking to do just that.
So how will the amendment address the root causes of land invasion, like housing shortages, systemic inequality, beyond just simply criminalizing illegal occupation?
Well, I mean, the amendments that are being made right now primarily are focused on land invasions and unlawful occupations. The act as it stands, 1998, is not an act that we believe needs to be completely changed. We don't believe that, because we believe that it does protect those very vulnerable South Africans. We are simply saying that the act needs to be updated. And we also need to reflect the act to what the conditions that South Africans are going through right now in the country. And to simply not find ways in which One, to protect property, because remember, property rights is protected by the Constitution. And it's fundamentally important that we are able to ensure that we stop criminality where it is. But not only that, as the DA, we've continued to fight in the Portfolio Committee of Human Settlements against the minister and the lack of responses that they've done in delivering RDP, or now known as BNG housing, to South Africans. We've held the entities to account, like the National Housing Corporation, where the CEO is facing allegations of corruption. We've been fighting because these responsibilities rest with a government that is clearly failing to deliver on its mandate. And we cannot believe and hope that things will change for ordinary South Africans when a government is simply failing to build more houses and to ensure that there is an online system for people to verify and see where they are on the housing list, or to simply hand out title deeds to as many people as possible. There's been a failure in that. And so our role will continue in the Portfolio Committee to hold the officials to account, the minister to account, and fight so that more title deeds can be given to South Africans so that people can have dignity, fight that more housing should be built. Yeah. And it's these very land parcels that these houses need to be built on that are being unlawfully taken. And so in doing that, with this legislation, we also protect land that is earmarked for housing to actually be developed as well.
Luyolo Mphithi is the DA's Human Settlement spokesperson. Thank you for talking to us this morning. Appreciate that. Some clarity there on why they are pursuing this particular amendment.